Okay, welcome everybody. Tonight, tonight is a very important topic. Was not necessarily the easiest of topics, but it's a very important topic. It's talking about we're gonna talk about cooking on Shabbos. Continue our series. This probably be our last one. And we'll I think last week worked well that we centered the discussion around a single case. So I think we'll do the same thing, and we'll talk about. Let's say you have a challah, right? So we talked about putting your challah up on Shabbos. Now, this is what happens. So you you decide you want to eat some of your challah, and you go to Nate's Kiddush, right? You have Nate's davening, and then you have a Kiddush afterwards, right? What could be better than davening Nate's? Nothing. So you have the Kiddush afterwards, and but you know that lunch isn't called for until 12:30, but you dominate, so you're hungry at 9:45. So you want to have some challah now, but you also want to have some challah later. Okay, that's great. We want you to have as much challah as possible. That's the goal of Shabbos. But how do you do that in a permissible manner? So that's going to be our discussion. So the issue is that just like last week, right, we talked about rabbinical decrees, where you're prohibited from leaving food on the fire as cooking started, as Shabbos started, or you can't insulate the food. So there was another rabbinic decree which is called Achzara. I mean, Chazara means Chazara or Chazara, that means to return. So there was a rabbinic decree against returning food, if you had food that was on the fire, on Shabbos, and then you took the food off the fire. So the rabbis, they made a decree that you cannot put the food back on the fire. So that would mean, right, if you take your cholent off the fire to eat your kiddush at 9:45 a.m., then you can no longer put your cholent back into the crock pot. You're done. So that's the rabbinic decree. Game over. But luckily, there are ways that you can do it in a permissible manner. So there's five conditions to remember. If you forget everything else from this year and you remember these five conditions, you'll be in pretty good shape. But these are the five conditions to remember, and we'll go through them in more detail. The first condition to remember is that you can do it if you have all five of these conditions. So condition number one is that the food must be entirely cooked. If your food is not done cooking, then once you take it off to put it back on, it's game over. You can't do that in no circumstances. So that's number one. Number two is that your method of cooking, right? So in our case, your crock pot has to have what we discussed last week called garuf v'katem, which means it has to be covered. The flame has to be covered, and the heating manner also, which we said was the knob, also has to be covered. So if we're talking about your crock pot, if you're making cholent, so in order to fulfill this condition, right, we said you should put tin foil on the knob and also put tin foil in between the crock and the pot. And if you do both of those, then you fulfilled the condition of garuf v'katem. Okay, that's condition number two. Condition number three is that the food has to be still connected to the original, basically to the original placement of of the of where you put it on Shabbos. This all this condition really means, it sounds, I didn't explain so well, it sounded more complicated than it is. All it means is that if you took the food off already and you didn't have these conditions, then you can't put it back anymore. You had to have these all these conditions in mind when you originally did it. Number four is that the number four is that it's odebiado, that the food, when you take off the pot, so it has to be still be in your hands. And if you let go of it, then you can't put it back on. And then condition number five is that you had to have das lahachzir, which means you had to have knowledge in from the first onset. When you took it off, you had to have in mind that when I was taking it off, I was always going to put it back on. So those are the five conditions that you have to do anytime you remove food from the fire, on Shabbos if you want to put it back on. So we'll review them again, just so we have it clear, because this is the most important thing. If you want to ever remove food from the fire on Shabbos, it needs to be number one. You can only do it when it is fully cooked. If it's not fully cooked, you can't do it. Number two, the flame has to be covered in what we call halachically garuf v'kata, meaning cover the flame and cover the knob. So if it's a crock pot, you line the inside and you put tinfoil on the knob. Number three, it has to have not been removed before. Number four is you shouldn't let go of the pot. Yeah, is to still be in your hands, right? So if you're going to take challah, you should keep a hand on it while you scoop, right? And scoop some of it into a bowl. And then number five, you had to, when you were taking off, you had to have had in mind the entire time that you were going to put it back on. Those are the five conditions. Um, okay, but the question is, and it is relevant, because we're gonna see how it makes a difference. But the question is, what's the reason for this rabbinic decree, right? Oh, we're just talking about cooking on a rabbinical level. None of this is cooking on a biblical level. So the rabbis, when they made a decree, there has to be a reason for their decree. Why would they say that removing something from the fire and putting back on is going to be prohibited rabbinically from cooking? It's obviously not cooking if it's fully cooked, right? There's no cooking after cooking. So why would the rabbis make this decree that you can't remove something off the fire and put it back on unless you have these five decrees, five conditions? That is a debate. That's a debate between as most things are. Always have a machlokas. So this is most famously a machlokas between Rashi and one of the Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam. Rashi says that the reason is because he has this phrase which is called merci kimvasha, which literally means it appears like cooking. Um, and Rabbeinu Tam he says, similar to the concern that when we were talking about leaving food on the fire as you're entering Shabbos, which was a concern. Maybe you're going to come to stoke the coals. So Rabbeinu Tam says the same thing here, that the rabbis were worried about the same thing, that if you take food off the fire and put it back on, you might come to stoke the coals, make the food cook faster. Albeit an elevated concern. The Rashi's phrase of merci kimivasha looks like cooking, so it's a little bit, there's different ways that one could understand what that means, right? Anytime that we talk about rabbinic decrees where we say, oh, it appears like this, so immediately, many of us will go to the topics related to Maris Ayin. We know that there's rabbinic, sometimes the rabbis were worried that if you were going to do something, which might appear to be prohibited which might appear that it's prohibited when you're really doing something which is totally permitted. Most common cases, like let's say you're driving on the highway, you need to stop and use the bathroom, so you have to go into a McDonald's. So this question is that maybe that shouldn't be allowed because people are gonna look at you, and the two separate things. Maybe one is Marsign, maybe one is something else. One issue might be that someone's going to look at you and think, oh, you see me going to McDonald's, oh, I'm doing something wrong, and maybe that's an issue. Or another issue could be someone might think, oh, that store is really kosher because I see Roey's going in there and he's got a kippah on, he's Jewish, okay, so it must be a kosher store. So but both of those could be the interpretation here of what Rashi means when he says it looks like cooking. Most understand that that's not actually what he means here. It means that you're doing an action which is very, very similar to a cooking action. And if you're going to do this action, you yourself might come to cook on Shabbos. Meaning you're taking food and putting it on the fire. So that same action can be replicated in a way where it does create cooking. So that's what many understand. What Rashi's concern was here is that you're doing action that same action could be cooking somewhere in a different situation. But either way, it is prohibited rabbinically to take food off the fire, put it back on the fire, unless you have these five conditions. Um, that's what it would seem. Although, if we go to, right, the Shulchan Aruch, always go to the Shulchan Aruch when we want to see, okay, at the end of the day, what do we hold? How do what is okay, what is not okay? So the Shulchan Aruch, he writes, these are the conditions you need. He says, okay, count them with me. He says, Vushal Kartocho needs to be entirely cooked. That's one for one, right? He says you need Garu Fikatim. It needs to be the fire needs to be covered. So far we're two for two. It needs to be still warm, still connected to the original placement on the fire. So that's good. We're three for three. And then he says something strange, and this is with this he finishes. He says, and you did not place it on the ground. So that doesn't seem like either of our conditions, right? We said it has to one be in your hand. And number two, you had to have knowledge from the beginning that you were going to put it back on the fire. He says something weird. He says you didn't put it on the ground. So it's not really clear what he means. He probably means that it still needs to be in your hands. It's some form of it still needs to be your hand. But for sure, what the Shulchan Aruch does not include is that he does not include the condition that you need to have had the in your mind from the beginning to put it back on the fire. He does not include that. But the Ramah, right, for us Ashkenazim, the Ramah, if you're worried, he makes sure to include both of them. He says very clearly it needs to still be in your hand, and you have to have had knowledge to to put it back onto the fire from the beginning. Um, so that seems to be how we hold. Although the Mishnah Brura does write that let's say you forgot one of the conditions. So are you okay? Can you put it back on the fire or not? So it depends what condition you forgot. If any of the first three you forgot, then you can't put it back on the fire, right? If it wasn't cooked, if the fire wasn't covered, if it had already been removed off the fire previously, then you can't put your cholent back into the crock pot. That is not okay. But so let's say you forgot either. Let's say you took your crock pot, you took the pot out of the crock, right, and you were serving it, and you forgot to leave your hand on it, or not and he says or let's say you forgot that you were gonna put it back on. You thought you had enough for lunch, and then someone told you, no, we actually have guests for lunch. You realize, oh, we need this to serve to everyone at lunch. So when you took it off the fire, you didn't have in mind that you were going to put it back on. So now can you put it back on, right? You kept your hand on it. So the Mishnah Berurah says that if you had one of the two, of either your hand still on it, if you had, or if you had um, knowledge, your thought was to put it back onto the fire, then in that case, you're okay. You're okay if as long as you have one of those two. First three you need, no matter what, but either four or five, the Mishnah Berurah writes you're okay. Rosh Hashanah does not like that Mishnah Berurah, but many are lenient like that Mishnah Berurah. Shlomo Zalman in the Shemir Shabbos Kelchasa, they say that Shlomo Zalman was lenient like this Mishnah Berurah. So that is a good thing to in the back of your keep in the back of your mind. Okay, what else do we have here? Um, there's a lot of interesting discussions. Like, do you need positive do you need this is an interesting discussion. Do you need positive do you need to have a positive thought that, when I take this food off of fire, I want to specifically put it back on? Or maybe like it's enough as long as you didn't have negative thought, right? You didn't think, oh, there's no way I'm putting this back on the fire. Like let's say you just weren't thinking. What if you just weren't thinking, you took it off? So that's a discussion that comes up. What else? Anything else interesting here? Um, Yeah, there's also a discussion if like what does it need to specifically be in your hand? Like let's say you put it on a countertop. So it's not really on the table, but it's not really still in your hand. So can you rely on that? Does that count as like still in your hand? Okay, those are all discussions, but for another time, there's a lot of details. You could you could spend many classes on this. Okay, this is a very common case, so we should spend time on this. What happens if a slightly separate case? You wake up Shabbos morning, 7 a.m., right? You're having lunch at 12:30, and your plan is to serve this challah at the lunch. Okay, what is the problem? You wake up at 7 a.m. and it looks like your challah is running out of water and starting to burn. So what can you do? Are there any options that you can do? So this um actually, I this is one of the times where it's actually um more lenient if you're Ashkenazi than if you're Sephardi. I started making a list. This is very interesting. I just started making a list that all the times where Sephardim have it better in halacha, have it easier in halacha than Ashkenazim, and all the times Ashkenazim have it more easy than Sephardim. I'm trying to make a big list, and that way I could do like top ten stuff Sephardim have and top 10 stuff that Ashkenazim have. So far, this one's going to go in top 10 for Ashkenazim because we're going to talk about what you can do. And Ashkenazim have a lot of options. In Sephardim, they don't really have any options. So there's four things you could do, and it seems like any four of these options would be okay if you're an Ashkenazi. If you're a Sephardi, they're not okay. So option number one is you could remove the pot from the crock, right? And then return it to its heat source, as long as again the heat source with the flame was covered. And you take water, um you take the urn that you have to have an urn already because you can't heat up water, but you have to take from the urn and pour directly from the urn into the pot. So the Ashkenazim will say that that's going to be totally okay as long as the pot has this garificat and the flame is covered. Sephardim would say this is not allowed because you're once you already pour from the urn into the pot, so from the moment it starts pouring, even though that water is hot, according to Sephardim, they say that the moment it starts pouring out, that's halachically cold water because it's leaving a clear rishon, right? It's leaving that first first it's leaving the vessel in which it was heated up, and as soon as it leaves the vessel which is it's heated up, it is now the status of cold water. Even though if you stick your hand under that water, you'd burn your hand, they'd say that is halachically, we view that as cold water. And if you're going to heat up cold water, that's going to be problematic on Shabbos. So that's going to not be okay. For the other options are you could keep the pot in the crock and then pour it directly from the urn. That's also going to be okay if you're an Ashkenazi. The only issue would be is that some say that I'm stirring. Stirring a pot on the fire you're not supposed to do. That's according to everybody. But some say that even if you're just going to scoop something out of the pot that's on the fire, that might be an issue. And similar to scooping something out of the fire, pouring water, pouring water into the pot is like similar action. So it's like close to stirring. So some say it's not so good to do it. If you want to do it, you do it slowly. Um, but for Spartan, the same issue is going to happen. That once you're taking water out of the urn, it's halachically cold water, and now you're heating it up. For an Ashkenazi, you can also remove the pot. You can remove the pot. But again, if you're removing pot out of the pot from the crock, right, you have to remember, right, now you're doing what we just talked about, chazara, right? You're taking food out of the fire. So can you put it back on the fire? So if you're going to do that, right, you should remember all the five conditions. So your challah has to be totally cooked, which it is. It's already burning. Your crock pot has to be covered, right? And you have to have knowledge that you're putting it back, which you do, but you should also keep your hand on the pot. So it might be a little bit of a two-person job here, but you can do it, right? And you can take the urn. You could either pour it into another cup, or you could pour it directly from the urn. and you pour it into the pot. But for Sephardim, none of these things are going to work because once it comes from the urn, it's already cold and it's not going to be okay. So Rav Ovadia says to you, so what should a Sephardi do if they wake up and they see their cholent is burning? So he says, I'm sorry. All you can do is you can take the cholent out of the pot, put it into a bowl, right? And once the bowl is in a klisheni, right? It's in a second vessel. So now we view that as halakhically cold, and you can add water there, and hopefully that saves your cholent. But it doesn't sound like it's going to save your cholent. Um, that's why that one's going to go on my top 10 Ashkenazim. Um, it's okay. Sephardim have a lot of good stuff too. They can eat kiniyot, right? A lot of, a lot of. It's going to be an interesting article. Anyways, okay. What else do we have? Okay, there's a question.
Yeah, does Rav just say you can ask an Ashkenazi, the Sephardi can ask the Ashkenazi Jew to to do any of the solutions?
I don't know. I didn't read them inside, but I don't know. What do we generally say about this? If for I think we say right if it this party thinks it's actually mutter for an Ashkenazi, which I think he would think in this case, then why not? Yeah, only if he thinks it's really usher for the Ashkenazi, but I think I think he would say that it's totally mutter for an Ashkenazi to do it. He just can't do it. Definitely if the Ashkenazi did it, this party could benefit.
So you
So
need a Shabbos Jew.
you need a shot. Yeah, you need Ashkenazi lying around to in the Sephardi shuls, Sephardi communities to add water to the cholent. You paid a lot of money for that job. Um, okay. Anyways, there. Yeah, this is okay. We'll mention this one too. That there's an opinion of the Ran. The Ran has an opinion which Rav Soloveitchik, I think, um, made a little famous. That the Ran has an opinion that anything which was on the fire, the Ran was one of the rabbis in. My father could for sure tell you exactly when he lived and where he lived, but as far as I know, he lived somewhere between probably 1100 to 1500. That's best I can do. But the Ran had an opinion that he said that anything which was on the fire as Shabbos started, so you can put back on the fire, no conditions necessary. Again, man, it was on the fire, meaning so your cholent right now, right? It was on the fire as Shabbos started. So you take it off. It could be sitting off there for the entire day, for the entire night. And the next morning you could put it back onto the fire. You don't need any of the conditions. So this is a very lenient opinion of the Ran, and there are also different ways to interpret the Ran. So it's limited by yeah, there's different ways to understand it. So the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, the way he understood it is that the Ran only said this about um, items which are dry, but items which are liquid um, would not be allowed. And that makes sense. That's very logical because we spoke about that maybe 2 years ago. That stuff that are liquid, anything which is liquid and which has become cold. So we said that if it's liquid and it's cold, we view that there is cooking after cooking. But if it's dry and it's cold and it was cooked before and was on the fire before, then we view that as no cooking after cooking. So that's a logical way to understand the Ran, but that is not how most understand the Ran. Most understand the Ran to mean that the Ran said that this is only true. This is only true that something which was on the fire going into Shabbos you could put back on without any of the conditions necessary, only if the item is still hot. But if the item is cold, um, then the conditions then then the conditions will be necessary. And so that eliminates much of the leniency, and most people understand the 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 Ran in that way. Our Soloveitchik understood the Ran in the way of the Vilna Gaon, and this is what they call the Bostoner Heter, because Rav Soloveitchik was the rabbi in Boston, so he had this leniency of the Ran, that you could rely on the Vilna Gaon on the Grush opinion that anything which was on the in the fire on the fire going into Shabbos you could put back on. Um, yeah, so if you want to rely on that, for sure you should ask someone with the halachic authority to make that ruling. Okay, and then finally, our last discussion is that okay. So we discussed these rabbinic decrees. We discussed cooking, leaving something on the fire as Shabbos is starting. We discussed insulating. We discussed like returning something to the fire. What about what's the most practical for us? Let's say you buy schnitzel. You want to eat it on Shabbos, right? And you keep it in your fridge and you want to heat it up for lunch. So this is none of these rabbinic decrees. This is something else. This is just putting something on the fire, going which was never on the fire on Shabbos at all, right? It's not hachsara. You're not taking something off the fire and putting it back on. This would actually seem to be more stringent because it was never on the fire and you're putting it on the fire in the first place. Um, so is that problematic? So the answer is it definitely could be. And in fact, it seems like this is the most strict. So you need, if one wants to do that and take something which was not on the fire at all, on Shabbos and put on the fire for the first time, even if it was previously cooked before, so you need the conditions, that 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 the fire source should be what we call garfakatum. And in fact, Rabbi Willick says that this is the most stringent degree of it. Meaning you have a concern, like we have both. In this case, we have both the concerns of maybe it looks like cooking, right? It's a similar action to cooking, and maybe you will come to stoke the flames. Um, so this is where it gets just to make it a little more practical. So this is most of us, I would think, heat up our food on a hot plate. So there's a big difference between a non-adjustable hot plate versus an adjustable hot plate. A non-adjustable hot plate, many understand that it solves all the issues. Why? Well, it's solve all issues because the issues we laid out, right, are maybe it looks like cooking, or maybe you're gonna stoke the coals. So if you have a non-adjustable hot plate, you for sure can't adjust anything, right? It's non-adjustable. It's just gonna sit there. But the only potential issue is maybe it looks like cooking. So most understand this. Moshe Feinstein, he had an opinion about this, and he said that if you can't cook on it, then it's okay. Um, there's a question what he means, but most understand that if you put on a non-adjustable hot plate, no one cooks on that. It's not practical to cook on it, so you have no issues at all, um, right? And so you would be able to do um anything, right? You'd be able to take the schnitzel, take it out of your fridge and put on a non-adjustable hot plate. If your hot plate is adjustable, um, so you might have solved that the it doesn't appear like cooking, but you could adjust it. So it might be an issue. So some are lenient and say that if you cover the knob really well, if you tape it up, so that way there's no way for you to adjust it, then you can even put something on it on Shabbos. Warming drawer is the same thing. That warming drawer. So many say it doesn't appear like cooking because it's not practical to cook on it. But if it's an adjustable warming drawer, if it has different levels, then what you should do is you should make sure to cover the knob so you can adjust it, and that way you can put something into the warming drawer on Shabbos. Whether it was in there going to Shabbos or even if it wasn't. Finally, if you notice, you'll see some people that on their hot plate they'll have like an upside down tin, and they'll put their food on their tin. So that's based on an opinion. It's based on the Gemara, which mentions no, sorry, not a Gemara, which opinion of the Rashba and the Ran that say that if you put a food on top of a pot, then there's no issues whatsoever. So there's a debate if that's only true if the pot has food on it. Maybe if the pot's empty, it won't work. So many rely on this though. But when you're setting up your kitchen, you should make sure that you set up whatever heating device you use to heat up your food, that you do so in a way where where it is done with a proper it solves the issues, and that there's no concern that you're doing something which appears like cooking, and there's no concern that you can adjust the temperature. And you should make sure to ask people who know how to do that appropriately. We'll stop there. Does anyone have any questions?